Welcome aboard Pink Monorail. I'm your pilot, Shelly Valladolid, and with me is my co-pilot, Noe Valladolid.
Hey everybody.
We're going to continue our talk about Manufacturing the Magic, the history of the American theme park. And last time we talked to you about fairs, and we're going to continue to talk about fairs, but there is something I forgot to mention last episode.
Oh, what's that?
Cheese rolling.
Cheese rolling?
That was a big deal at some of the fairs in England in medieval times and so on.
Okay.
Up until the 1800s. They took those big blocks of cheese, you know, the big round ones?
Yeah.
They're like 2 feet across, and they'd roll them down a hill, and people would chase them, and whoever caught it, got to keep the cheese.
Plus a concussion or a broken leg or something.
It was worth it for all that cheese.
And some of those events are still happening.
Cheese is really good.
It is. And some of those events are still happening to this day.
They still do cheese rolling in England.
Ooh-wee. That's a long-standing tradition.
But we're going to segue away from fairs, like our state and county fair, and we're going to start talking about World's Fairs, which any fan of the 1964 World's Fair knows is a big Disney thing. But we're actually going to look at some early World's Fairs and expositions and how it started, and some of the inventions and interesting things and theming popped up. The first World's Exposition was held in 1851 in London, and it was actually called an exhibition. London calls theirs exhibitions, and the rest of the world calls them expositions.
Okay.
And to this day, they're called expos. The Great Exhibition, or the Crystal Palace Exhibition, was based in a temporary structure at Hyde Park. The Crystal Palace restaurant at Walt Disney World is named after it and is inspired by it. And the architecture looks very much the same, but on a much smaller scale.
So that was ironworks in that era.
Right.
So it was a temporary iron structure, but it had still a lot of like glass or crystal panels on it.
Yes.
Okay.
Exhibition was organized by Sir Henry Cole, who started the practice of sending out Christmas cards.
Really?
He was the first one.
Huh.
And he was a good friend of Prince Albert, so I'm sure Prince Albert got one. He also designed the first postage stamp in the whole world, the penny black.
There were post services because Ben Franklin was like a postmaster in the U.S. and that was before 1851.
Well, this is before 1851 too. This is just stuff he's done in the past.
Oh, okay. I thought, wow, if that happened in the same year, he's kind of slow to make. So he invented postage stamps.
And he started England's post office's penny post, where you buy the 1-cent stamp and put it in a mailbox, and a postman takes it to the post office, and it's sent off with another postman to be delivered.
Oh, okay. He invented that whole sort of bit.
And we rely on it so much for all of our packages from Amazon. He was a member of the Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce. And I'm going to pick out a word here. Manufacturers, not manufacturers, not manufacturing. Manufacturers. That's what we'd call manufacturing now, or things that are manufactured. But manufacturing was very new then, and they had this new word that they ended up not using after about 50 years. But they got the backing of Prince Albert in 1847, and they got a royal charter, which we learned about last time.
The privilege thing we were talking about the other time.
Right, the royal charter. So they became the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce. Cole launched exhibitions that were England only in 1847, 1848, and 1849. But in 1849, he visited the 11th quinquennial Paris exhibition. That means the 11th one. And wondered why they couldn't do an international exhibition. The 11th Paris exhibition was also called the Great Exhibition of Products of French Industry, and they had those from 1798 to 1849. So they were old hands at this. England had only had a few. But he took the RSA's plans for the 1850 and 1851 English exhibitions, and got Queen Victoria to give consent to form the Royal Commission for the exhibition of 1851. The president was, of course, Prince Albert. The Crystal Palace, where the exhibition was held, was a giant iron and glass structure. It was 990,000 square feet and held more than 14,000 separate exhibitors from around the world. And this is actually one of the smallest ones that we're going to be looking at today. Designed by Joseph Paxton, the Great Exhibition Building was 1,851 feet long and 128 feet tall. It was 3 times the size of St. Paul's Cathedral. It cost £80,000 to build, which is about $12 million today, and it had 60,000 panes of glass. It took 39 weeks to complete, and after the exhibition it was moved to the top of Pongay Peak next to Sydenham Hills, an upscale neighborhood in London. It was destroyed by fire in 1936. The park is still there and contains an exhibition that was inside of it after it moved, of dinosaurs from 1854. Now, did you know that George Washington never heard of a dinosaur?
Oh, I believe it.
None of the people in the time. The giant bones they thought were from giant humans from the Bible and from Egyptian wall paintings and things. They had no idea that there was such a thing as a dinosaur. So in 1854, they have a rough idea of what dinosaurs are. And these statues are of what they think dinosaurs looked like back in 1854. And apparently they're pretty funny.
Oh, I gotta look at these things.
Yeah, they're online. The Times of London's Charles Sidorp called the exposition that in planning one of the greatest humbugs, frauds, and absurdities ever beheld.
Who denied that? The French people?
No, it was an English guy.
An English guy?
Yeah, he didn't think that getting together with the other countries was such a good idea.
If anybody that would have been offended that the Brits were doing something nice, I'm surprised it wasn't a Frenchman.
No, the French were all for it. In Perth, Scotland, there is a statue of Prince Albert holding the plans for the Crystal Palace. So in the building itself, it was 128 feet high. They had to build a transept, which went across the building, 180 feet high, because they had 2 big oak trees, and people were protesting that they were going to cut down the oak trees.
Oh, no.
So they saved the trees. Oak or elm trees? Elm trees.
So they built around?
They built around the elm trees and had these beautiful glass ceilings over the elm trees that let in the light. They did have a problem with sparrows, but they got a couple of sparrowhawks and the problem went away. So the building was 2 stories tall.
Okay.
You had your grand entranceway, and then you had a big open gallery. And then in the main room, there were 2 stories.
So it was like an atrium with balconies and stuff?
Exactly.
And open space in the middle.
And an open space in the middle.
Okay. Almost like a giant crystal and iron airplane hangar for the scale of it.
Exhibitioners included a medieval court, carriages, rope making, fine arts, paper and cotton, as well as exhibits from New South Wales, the West Indies, Africa, Switzerland, and France. The United States had a corner spot and exhibited musical instruments, raw produce, oil, cloths, and hardware.
This is literally the next evolutionary step of those traditional fairs that we had encountered. What's changed now is that they're starting to feature actual manufacturers that make these goods and no longer necessarily relying on people that were bringing spices and oils and exotic.
Right, and they didn't really buy from the exhibitors. The exhibitors were just showing what their stuff was, and people ordered later. They placed cloths over the roof to soften the sunlight and to disperse heat, because it was all glass.
Right.
They sometimes needed to spray the cloth with water to cool down the building, and it worked.
Did they have some sort of sprinkler or irrigation system up there?
No, it was done by hand.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have cranes at that time either. Everything was handed up.
Ladders,
yep.
Buckets. Oh,
exactly.
No.
So what they did have was an ingenious ventilation system. The floors were not solid; they were boards.
Okay.
And they were lifted, so air could go underneath and go in between them and go underneath. And there were vents along the tops of the walls in which they could let in cool air, and the air would come in also underneath the wood and go up.
So it created a sort of cross ventilation.
Yeah, they hired a couple hundred people to sweep up every day, but it turns out that the women's long skirts were doing most of the sweeping.
Well, here's the fashion.
Britain occupied over half of the building. France came in second, the largest foreign contributor. There were 4 main categories: raw materials, machinery, manufacturers, and fine arts. The Koh-i-Noor diamond was on display, which was at the time the largest diamond in the world.
This was before the Hope diamond?
The Hope diamond wasn't the largest. It was just the most cursed.
Oh, okay.
They had an entire fire engine. in there.
Uh-huh.
They had a 27-foot tall crystal fountain.
Oh, how pretty that must have been.
Yeah, and it must have cooled the air off nicely, too.
Yeah.
The first week, it cost £1 to go in.
Okay.
So only the aristocracy and oligarchs could afford to go in.
Yeah, £1 in 1851 for today's money. Those are like current Disneyland ticket prices.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like $200 and $300.
I don't know if it's that much, but it was a lot. Then it was 5 shillings after May 26th to let the working man in. Then it went down to 1 shilling on weekdays, and the working class really made it in.
Oh, very good.
On weekdays, it was 2 shillings and 6 pence on Fridays, and 5 shillings on Saturdays for crowd control. Much like Disneyland does today.
It's a flexible pricing.
Flexible pricing, yes. A shilling was about 12 pennies.
Well, that's 12 pennies in 1851.
Exactly.
Which is still a good amount of money back then.
Absolutely. It was a huge success. They had over 6 million visitors, made £186,000 profit, which was used to fund the Victoria and Albert Museum, where you can see a napkin with the original sketch of the Crystal Palace on it. It was the very first sketch that the architect made.
Oh, really?
Of the Crystal Palace. And it's on a napkin in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It also funded the Natural History Museum, educational trust that still exists today. It was also known as the first major installation of public toilets.
Here's the history.
Over 827,000 visitors paid a penny to use them. And in British, there's a saying, spend a penny. Well, what if I want to spend a penny? Won't he be able to see from the young ones? Spend a penny means go to the bathroom. Yeah, and I strongly feel that that's where it came from, though. So not everyone agrees with me. Queen Victoria visited 3 times with her family and 34 times on her own. She loved it. Have you heard of Thomas Cook Travel?
Thomas who?
Thomas Cook Travel? Well, they're a tour agency. They're very popular today, based in Britain, but they ran a lot of tours to Hawaii, so that's how I knew them. But Thomas Cook got his start booking trips to the exhibition.
Oh, okay.
And booking the hotels and the train travel, as there were no airplanes then.
So he made enough money, got enough business that he started expanding.
Yes. And now you can go to Hawaii with Thomas Cook Travel. There's a memorial to the exhibition located behind Royal Albert Hall. So if you go there, go back in time to 1982 and see Adam and the Ants performing there.
Or 1966 and see the Beatles perform there?
Oh, yeah. You can go back there. There's a memorial.
Oh, nice.
Yes, Romeo. That's Romeo, our cat. Some of the other things they had were a loom. And what they would do is they'd show cotton and spin the cotton and put it on the loom and make it into cloth, the whole banana.
From A to Z.
From A to Z, and show it.
Okay.
And that was in the American pavilion. They also showed off kitchen appliances, which were a brand new thing. Steel making displays. Door locks, which were new to people then. I mean, the rich had them, but ordinary people didn't have door locks.
Right.
And this was door locks for everyday people. Daguerreotype. Do you know what a daguerreotype is?
Daguerreotype? That was like the original copy machine, wasn't it? Or something to that effect?
It was an early style of portraiture.
Oh, before the silver plate photographs.
Before the silver plate, exactly. They had the precursor to the fax machine there.
I remember hearing that the fax machine is old technology because it's building on telegraph wires, things like that.
Exactly. So even before the phone, they had the fax. They had a voting machine. Samuel Colt was there from America showing off his revolvers. The America's Cup started then and was part of the exhibition. And part of it was the America's Cup yacht race that still goes.
The sailing ship race.
Roy Disney's yacht, the Pyewacket, won a few times. They would have that by where I used to live in Hawaii, and he would hang out there and tell people not to call him Mr. Disney. They also had an iron-framed piano, like an upright piano, and the piano was cut pretty new at that point. It was less than 100 years old. And they had a telescope. They had items from New Zealand, Maori items, that people were just fascinated with, and stereoscopic cards.
Okay.
And we see those at Walt Disney World's Carousel of Progress, where he's looking at a World's Fair from the St. Louis World's Fair. Little Sheba, who we're going to talk about.
Now, if you're a younger fan and you don't have a concept of it, so this is initially some of the early technology that would eventually lead to VR technology. You had two photographs, a left eye and a right eye photograph, that were printed on a sort of postcard, and you had these sort of glasses, sort of magnifying glasses that you would look through, and you would adjust it to your field of vision. You can still actually achieve a similar effect if you have Photoshop or a program that's like that. If you take your
Viewmaster.
Camera, or Viewmaster, if you use your phone, even a camera phone, I've done this before, take a picture approximately where your left eye is, and then move it just an inch or two to the right to where approximately your right eye is, and take another picture. And you can actually sort of separate a red and a blue color spectrum in Photoshop, so you can create that illusion of depth, because each photograph has a slight angle on it for perspective, and depending on what you set as your focus, it will give the photograph the illusion of depth. So they actually had this technology hundreds of years ago where they would print them on these cards. They would sell these cards to the tourists so that they can remember where they were. And they weren't just cards, they were 3D cards that they would look at. So of zoos, of parks, all sorts of neat stuff.
You know what else came from that fair?
Huh.
Schweppes soda water, the world's first soft drink. You could buy it at Farrell's for 5 cents a glass. They still sell it. There had been one international exposition before in Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. It was kind of small, so the International Board of Expositions didn't consider it official. The first official one was 1851 in London. For World's Fairs, there are 3 eras: industrialization, cultural exchange, and nation branding. Industrialization, 1850 to 1938. Technology, new inventions, the telephone, the telegraph, the fax machine, advances in technology.
Those were the highlights of them, in addition to all of the crafts and sales that they were trying to get.
Right. Cultural exchange, 1939 to 1987. More social interest. 1939's motto was building a better tomorrow. 64-65 was peace through understanding. Was interpersonal relations.
I think 85 in Japan, if I remember correctly, was it was a flower exposition, but I think the overarching theme was working harmoniously in nature.
Oh, nice. 1967, the expo became the new name. They were no longer called World's Fairs or Expositions or Exhibitions. They were just Expo, like Expo 67. Nation building, 1988 to present, you're not going to go and you're not going to see Futurama. You're not going to see a Carousel of Progress. You're going to see Japan and its history and its relationship with the world. You're going to see more things like that.
That was during the cultural era, the cultural exchange era.
From 1988 to present.
Oh, okay. So, but in the 60s, they were still doing cultural things.
They were still doing cultural things.
Okay.
But they still have cultural things now, but it's more our relationship with the world in each nation's pavilion. So that was a success. And Exposition Universelle de 1855 was the first of 10 French expositions held between 1855 and 1937, and its proper name was Exposition Universelle des Produits de l'Agriculture, de l'Industrie et des Beaux-Arts de Paris 1855.
I have a feeling you just killed a Frenchman with that pronunciation.
I probably did. Universal Exposition of Products of Agriculture, of Industry, and of the Fine Arts is what it means. The Palais l'Industrie was the big building, and it was right in between the Seine River and the Champs-Élysées, which is a famous walkway in Paris. Napoleon III was in charge of France at the time, and he wanted to show up the Crystal Palace, so they built the Palais d'Industrie. It was first built in 1839 and raised and rebuilt in 1844, 1849, 1855, demolished in 1897, and the Grand Palais would be built in 1900. They just kept knocking it down and rebuilding it bigger.
They had to stump the British. They're like, they're not going to build anything bigger than what we got.
Exactly. It combined traditional masonry with glass and cast iron. It had to be reworked several times due to cost, and that the building just couldn't stand its own weight. It was not big enough to hold all the exhibitors, so 2 temporary side buildings were built. It had poor ventilation, and people were hot all day.
It sounds like it wasn't being pulled off as well as the Crystal Palace.
It was not. The French described it as an ox trampling through a rose garden. The style was called Beaux Arts, Beauxarts, Beaux Arts, and it's a style of architecture that looks very much like Roman and Greek, together with 17th century style statuary attached to the building. That's the Beaux Arts style, and you see that here in Paris, you see it in London in 1862, and you see it at the World's Columbian Exhibition, where it's such a big hit that the planners of Washington D.C. actually grabbed all those architects and designers from the exposition and had them build Washington D.C.
Okay,
so all those, the Lincoln Memorial, all of those.
Okay, so that's why it has that marble feel, the column structures,
right?
The classical. It's a callback to that era, and it was the French designers that had started the whole.
Yeah, it was. We also saw it in the Grand Palais and Petit Palais, built for the Paris 1900 World Fair. The Great London Exhibition of 1862 followed. It was held from May 1st till November 1st, where the Natural History and Science Museums and Victoria and Albert Museums are now in South Kensington, London. Samuel Babbage showed off his analytical engine here, which was the precursor to the computer.
Yeah.
And the calculator.
Babbage's calculators.
Yep, exactly. Japan's embassy members made their first tour of Europe. It was due to be held in 1861, but it was delayed by Italy's War for Independence and the American Civil War. 28,000 exhibitors from 38 countries. Queen Victoria was in mourning for Prince Albert and didn't go, but they sent her stereoscopic pictures of the whole thing. The building was made of cast iron and brick. Items on display were a railroad engine and car, electric telegraph, which was Edison's, the first plastic, maritime engines, and stained glass windows. A refrigerator that made ice was a big sensation. William Morris brought the arts and crafts movement in, which was a huge design influence from then until the early 20th century.
That was Art Nouveau?
No, arts and crafts is different from Art Nouveau.
Arts and crafts, that's
Art Deco, Art
Nouveau,
and Arts and crafts.
Okay.
This exhibition eclipsed all others until the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1867. The war was on. This celebrated the culmination of the Second French Empire under Napoleon III. It ran April 1st to October 31st. There were 42 countries and 92,000 businesses. It was held on the Champ de Mars, M-A-R-S. And who's Mars the god of?
War.
Yes, it was their parade grounds. Huge military parade grounds. And they had the main building plus over 100 smaller buildings, and this was the first time you saw multiple buildings at a World's Fair.
So instead of trying to top the Crystal Palace with one just massive structure, they had a nice main building and more reasonable smaller buildings to put all the other exhibitors.
There were 703 exhibits from the United States, and there were 2 double-decker hot air balloons that would take people up above the height of the building to admire the fairgrounds. It would take 12 people up at a time. Electricity harnessed was new and showed off at the fair, and Jules Verne visited the fair and saw that and pretty much ran with it.
It sparked his imagination.
He imagined the nuclear submarine. Buildings were themed for the first time. You go to a theme park, you're going to see themed buildings, usually.
Themed areas and themed buildings.
Right. Well, that's what they had here for the first time. The Siam Elephant Pavilion looked like a Thai castle.
Would be Burma now?
Thailand.
They
had a Japanese building that looked like a Japanese building with the roof and the... Right. They had an Egyptian building that the government of Egypt put up. And that had all sorts of beautiful hieroglyphic paintings on the walls and mummy caskets and the whole bit. And actually, a river ran through the middle of it.
Of the Egyptian pavilion?
Of the Egyptian pavilion, and 2 rooms of it were the Suez Canal, and that's where they collected money to build the Suez Canal.
Oh, wow.
Money came from a lot of other places than the fair, but still, that was pretty impressive. The country then called Austria-Hungary gave London and Paris a break in 1873, and they celebrated Franz Joseph I's 25th year as emperor. It ran from May 1st to November 2nd and had about 7 million visitors. And this was actually quite notable that they had so many because they had really bad logistics. There was no way to get to the fair through trolley car or
trains,
road or
trolleys.
Just carriage.
Oh my gosh.
And the carriage makers upped the price really high.
Of course.
Just exorbitant prices. But they still managed to get in over 7 million people. Notable pavilions include the Japanese and Russian pavilions, Ottoman Empire Pavilion, Egyptian, New Zealand, and Italy, which had the first crematorium.
Oh.
They've been burning bodies forever, but the first modern crematorium.
Oh, wow.
America took the leap in 1876 as well, so there was 2 competing expositions. Officially, the International Exhibition of Art, Manufactures, and Products of the Soil and Mine. It ran from May 10th to November 10th of that year. It was the Centennial Exhibition because it was a centennial from the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. It had also been a good 10 years past the end of the Civil War, and America really wanted to show itself as being forward and progressive. The only surviving structure is Memorial Hall in Philadelphia, which is built as an art gallery. It now houses the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The Beaux Arts style was used in that building. We would later see in the White City, made of granite, marble, and plaster that had no wood, and so was considered fireproof. Unlike the buildings at the White City.
Right.
President Ulysses S. Grant opened the exposition with both houses of Congress present. There were over 200 buildings. Visitors could see new inventions like the typewriter, sewing machine, and telephone. But it wasn't a great exposition to show off in front of England and France. They only had 35 countries and 14,420 exhibitors showed up. It was based more upon the Great Sanitary Fair of 1864.
Great Sanitary Fair?
The Great Sanitary Fair of 1864.
What?
Mostly livestock, and it was not an official.
We must have still been seen as some backward small country.
Yeah, exactly. Then European expositions.
Right.
The fair sold shares to finance itself. Something new. $10 shares. They sold $1.8 million worth of shares, which is $43.6 million today. I did the math. Pennsylvania contributed $1 million, and Congress gave them $1.5 million, and then after the fair was over said, give us our loan back. And they're like, loan? But they had to pay Congress back, and it took years. It was the very first exposition to have a women's building. And when I say women's building, I mean women's building. The architect was a man.
Of course.
Every worker on it was a woman.
Okay.
Every exhibit was designed by a woman. Every exhibit was run by a woman. The people sweeping up were women. Every person who worked in there was a woman.
Okay.
And they showed off things like sewing machines and glove straighteners and all sorts of things that women they thought liked.
All right.
And the women decided that what went in there, so I guess it was right. They also had temporary hotels that they built just because there was always lodging problems at previous fairs in Europe. And they even had a small hospital on property, which they never had to use for anything more than like blisters. But it's good it was there. They had 6 police stations and 500 guards working in them. One of the police stations was 2 stories and had a courtroom. So if you misbehaved, you got in trouble.
You got an instant sentence.
Instant sentence, yes. They did not have any jails on property. They had such close quarters, though, for the guards, sleeping together, 20 to a room and such, that most of the time some of the guards were sick.
Oh, no.
They caught everything you could possibly imagine. But let's go back to the main exhibition building. It was the largest in existence at that time, bigger than anything in Europe. But they also had smaller buildings, like I said, 200 of them. They had a Swedish schoolhouse, which is now in New York State. They had British bicycles with the giant front tire.
The penny farthings?
Yes. I didn't know that they were called that until I looked this up.
Oh, everybody knows that, Shelly.
Oh no,
Common knowledge.
I'm stupid.
No, I know bikes. I like bikes. And that's like the one piece of trivia I know about bikes. Don't ask me anything else.
The one disappointing thing about the exhibition for them was that they were going to build a 1,000-foot tower.
Wow, that would have been a spectacle of that era.
2 pyramids with a big, tall, thin pyramid in the middle. And you see echoes of that in the 1939 World's Fair.
Uh-huh.
That big trilon. But they just couldn't raise the money for it. And also, a heat wave occurred and really hit attendance. Wasn't good until September. November, it was good.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole summer, hardly anybody came. It was not a financial success, but other countries stopped seeing America as a backward wilderness.
Well, it took us a while to get there, but we got there.
Yeah, exactly. The greatest invention of the exposition, in my opinion, was the Centennial Monorail, the world's first monorail. It was a steam engine and a passenger car straddled a singular rail way up high.
So it was elevated.
Yes, elevated.
So the rail was above the cars or under the cars?
Under the cars.
Okay, just making
The car
sure.
straddled them.
Okay,
Straddled the rail.
but it was a single rail.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
Very first monorail, and I have a special place in my heart for it. But some good things came out of that. Popcorn,
Uh-huh.
Heinz ketchup, and before that they had mushroom ketchup, but they didn't have tomato ketchup.
Oh, really?
Really.
Now, we have tried mushroom ketchup.
It's good.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. Root beer to
And this is
pull one up on Schweppes with their club soda.
1876, you say?
1876. Root beer.
Wow.
They had a cross-section of a cable from the Brooklyn Bridge, which was being built.
Oh, wow.
It was huge.
Yeah, it was massive.
People would take pictures with it, not selfies. But people would take pictures with this huge piece of cable.
Right.
The biggest draw of the exhibition was the right hand of the Statue of Liberty.
The
Right
torch hand.
The right arm and torch of the Statue of Liberty in its copper glory.
Wow, that must have been so beautiful.
For 50 cents, you could climb up a ladder and go up to the little balcony that's on the torch
Wow.
and look around.
They were probably raising money for it.
They were raising money for the pedestal.
Oh, that she was going to rest on.
Exactly, where they have the poem. This was the first time anyone in America had seen bonsai trees. Remember how I said we were looking to show how progressive they were?
Mm-hmm.
New Jersey Pavilion was one of the most popular. It was a reconstruction of the Ford Mansion, which is George Washington's headquarters from 1779 to 1780. They had costume presenters and a colonial kitchen with a spinning wheel and someone cooking in the big pot and all that in costume.
So it wasn't enough to have themed buildings, themed areas. Now that we're actually going and doing historical presentations as well.
Yes.
Inside the
Yes.
exhibitions.
Yes.
Okay.
So this started a huge colonial revival in the United States where they wanted that old-fashioned furniture and stuff again. So this exhibition for the future turned out having a big influence on the past.
It was Quaker furniture, Shaker furniture,
No, colonial.
colonial furniture. Well, who built them? Probably those Quakers, wasn't it?
Maybe. I had some shaker furniture. It was great. If you're interested in that exhibition at all, go to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and you can see a lot of items from it. They built a smaller viewing platform. They had enough money for that. And you go like 120 feet up high, something like that. They built that, and they had that, and people went on it. When the fair was over, they dismantled it and moved it to Coney Island,
Oh, okay.
where it stood for many years. Okay, back to Paris for the third of their 10 major expositions. In 1878, the Trocadero Palace was built, which was a 4,000-seat auditorium, and it was well known for having terrible acoustics. It was dismantled due to the acoustics not until 1935.
Well,
But it was used for a bunch of different things in between then.
Right.
The exposition brought us wonders like the ice machine and electric streetlights, pretty much built in 6 months. They knew it was coming, they just didn't finance it or anything until 6 months before.
Oh, gosh.
The government was falling apart.
Right.
So some buildings were unfinished. They had just lost the Franco-Prussian War since the last exposition against Germany.
Right.
It was nonetheless the biggest ever put on at the time. Germany did not attend. This is where staff was invented, and staff is really important to early World's Fairs. It was invented in Paris in 1870. 1976. It's a low-cost hemp-based building material. Temporary, but looked great. It was made of jute fiber, plaster of Paris, and cement, and you could carve beautiful angels and flowers and scrolls into it, and it just looked perfect, and you could put it on walls, and it looked like it was marble. It was just beautiful.
Like a wonder
and
material.
so flammable.
Oh, no.
The entire Avenue de l'Opera, which is a street that went through the fairgrounds, was lit by electric arc lights. The worst thing to come out of this was something called the Human Zoo. It's just as bad as it sounds. They had 400 people, indigenous people, and it was nicknamed the Negro Village.
I remember seeing this in history class. It was not pretty.
It was not pretty. They had those at World's Fairs for a way long time, longer than they should have.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But they had some good things. They had solar energy, was first used to make steam and to make ice, and they won a special award for that. Steinway introduced his grand piano, and they had, you know how they had the hand of the Statue of Liberty in Philadelphia?
Uh-huh.
They had the whole head.
Oh, wow.
Right next to the Trocadero Gardens. In 1880, they had one in Melbourne in what is now Australia, and it became the first World's Fair in the Southern Hemisphere. Melbourne International Exhibition was its full name. The Royal Exhibition Building still stands, and it was just exhibition building, but Queen Elizabeth II made it royal by proclamation. So it is the Royal Exhibition Building, and it's still standing and is really beautiful. There's pictures of it online. And huge, it's 64 acres. It wasn't called Australia back then, it was the Colony of Victoria. The fair operated from October 1st, 1880 to April 30th, 1881, because their summer is our winter.
Right.
Sydney International Exhibition had actually launched a year earlier, but it focused mainly on agriculture, and the BIE, which is the ruling board I mentioned earlier, didn't allow it to be officially recognized. But they pulled in 1.4 million people anyway.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good.
Yeah, for Australia.
For an unofficial Australian expo.
I don't think people realize how far away Australia is.
Yeah.
It is very far away.
From us. But if you're
in Europe, too.
Well, if you're living in the Philippines or Japan.
Right, it's not. But if you're the BIE.
Yeah. It's a world away.
It is. The next one was in Barcelona, Spain. They held the next officially recognized exposition, the Exposició Universal de Barcelona and Exposición Universal de Barcelona in 1888, and I don't know the difference between the two. I don't think anybody does. They had the whole park, Cortadella Park, built for the exhibition, is still standing and still operational. There are 3 buildings left. The Arc de Triomphe, which looks like France's but is red, the Castle of the Three Dragons, and the Columbus Monument from where he first returned after visiting the New World. There were 27 countries, and it made $1.7 million. With Barcelona finished, we're getting ready to go to Paris again, but I think this is a good time to stop. We'll see you next time on Pink Monorail Podcast.
A special shout out to our sponsor, Circa 1955. Nicole is the founder of Luxillume, a small company that makes candles, wax melts, and room sprays. She creates scents that capture the season, nature, or wonderful memories. She also takes commissions for larger orders, such as weddings or company gifts. It turns out that Nicole is also a huge Disney fan and has a line called Circa 1955. She creates scents inspired by all things Disney. This includes the parks, attractions, treats, and films. She creates each formula and batch of candles herself. For every one scent she's released, she's probably made over 200 trials just to get the smell right. Don't take my word for it. Go to circa1955.com, order a candle, and use promo code PINK15. That's PINK15 to get 15% off your purchase. Support a small company that also gives back to the community. You're going to love it.
Do you miss Disneyland? Do you ever want to shut your eyes and envision yourself there? Window to the Magic podcast records live at Disneyland, so all you have to do is shut your eyes and listen, and you're at Disneyland. Join Paul Berry at Window to the Magic.
Another shout out to Jim Hill for hosting Pink Monorail on his podcast network. The Jim Hill Podcast Network also includes looking at Lucasfilm, the Disney dish, I Want That, and fine-tuning. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review for each podcast. Have a great day.